About ready to get started. Commissioners, can you hear me okay? We're not getting anything back.
Natalie nodded.
Okay.
Thumbs up. Thumbs
Okay.
up.
All right. I just last meeting, we got a report back that it was a little muffled when I would speak. So we just want to make sure it comes through okay. And if you need to, it's okay to just say there's something wrong with the sound and just let us know. Okay. So let's get started. Good evening, everyone. The September 23rd, 2021 Wacom County Planning Commission meeting is called to order. I will call the roll and let me know if you are here. Robert Bartel.
Here.
Kelvin Barton, that's me. I'm here. Atul Dasmani. Cool. Jim Hansen. Jim Hansen. Right. Stephen Jackson. Stephen Jackson. Kimberly Lund.
Here.
John Mayberry.
Here.
Natalie McClendon.
Here.
Dominic Masseri.
Here.
Okay, and Jim Hansen, looks like you're online with us now. Jim, can you, we can see you, but we don't hear anything. We'll give it a little bit of time. Okay, right now, would you please join me in the flag salute? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so now is the time for department update. Mark Personius, would you give us the update, please?
Hi, Commissioners. Good evening. Just a couple schedule things for you. County Council update, the next meeting next week. We've got a pretty busy agenda with them. We'll be considering the capital improvement program amendments that you recommended, the battery energy storage regulations, as well as the homeless facilities regulations. And as well as they're going to continue their review of the shoreline management plan update with Cliff next week as well. So that's all progressing. Just an update for you guys on your schedule. Tonight's reviewing potential marijuana code amendments. We scheduled a public hearing at your next meeting on October 14th, and that'll be 3 weeks from now. So this is where we kind of get that break in the year and we get back on the same schedule as the county council. So October 14th will be your next meeting, anticipating a public hearing on the regulations. And then just for the rest of the fall, we've got the Buildable Lands Program methodology review coming to you, the 2020 open space tax applications, repeal of the Cherry Point sub-area plan now that those Cherry Point amendments have been adopted, and then wireless communication code amendments to close out the year. So a lot of stuff still on your docket. I apologize, I won't be able to attend all of the meeting tonight. I have a geriatric dog issue I have to deal with, but anything else, you guys are in good hands. Cliff is here, Charles is here, and I think Amy Keenan will be joining us as well. Yes, Amy's there, I see. So you guys are in really good hands with if you have any questions tonight regarding the marijuana code. So any questions you guys have of me?
I'm not seeing any there, Mark, but thank you. Have a good
All right,
evening.
thanks you guys. Have a good meeting.
Just for the record, I see that I had seen that Jim was logged in, but Jim is here on screen. So Commissioner Hansen, glad you're here.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Hallelujah.
Okay, so now is the time for open session for public comment. And that's to speak about anything you'd like to speak to us about. And we've been moving toward a format because of Zoom where Tammy is going to take over calling on the guests and reading the rules. And that keeps us consistent with the county council, and that's the goal. So Tammy, go ahead.
Okay, welcome to the meeting tonight. This meeting is being broadcast live. The audio is being recorded and will be posted to the county website. Members of the public may join the meeting online or by phone. If you're watching live and wish to join the meeting to speak, please go to the link listed on the screen earlier tonight. Instructions on how to join the meeting are also at the bottom of the web page where you found the link to actually watch the meeting. So if you go back one in your browser, you should be able to get to that screen. So there is no hearing tonight, so we don't need to talk about that. If there is anyone who would like to provide public comment at this time, please virtually raise your hand to request to speak. If you're using the internet, you do that with the hand icon. If you're calling by phone, please press *9. Okay, we do have two people. So speakers may be called on by name or based on the last 3 digits of their phone number. When called on, press the microphone symbol to unmute yourself. If you joined by phone, when you hear a message that the host has unmuted your phone, you'll press *6. You'll state your full name for the record and direct all comments to the chair. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to speak. The screen timer will show when your 3-minute speaking time is up. Staff may also announce time up or mute your microphone. So looks like we are ready to get started. And the first one up is Mark Ambler, and then Jim Mcrae, you will be next. One moment, and I will get the timer up and then allow you to speak as well. Oh, no, I'm going to do the other first.
Hi, sound check.
All right, just one moment while I get the timer up.
Okay.
And go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, just sound check.
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Good. Good. Yeah, my name is Mark Ambler. I am a resident. I'm a former environmental engineer, but I still have my PE license in Hawaii, actually. But I'm currently a cannabis producer, and before I started this cannabis business, I was designing odor control devices as an environmental engineer. So like we're the guys that the mechanical engineers would call when they got this kind of job where they need to design a odor control device. So, you know, when you in the future, if you guys are considering codes where there's a certain kind of stamp for an odor pollution control device, like our best design person was a chemical engineer, and I was a civil and environmental engineer. I would say I was our second best, and then our mechanical guy was the new guy. So it's really depends on your business. And the other thing that was prescriptive was that you dictated that you had to shoot. Well, anyway, let me skip to the next thing. Just that PE thing, if you're going to designate an engineer, it should be any type of engineer, because it's hard to say who's going to have the experience to design an odor control device. Okay, the second thing is, what if a grower isn't producing flower that produces odor? Like, what if you're making clones? Like, what if that's your business? You're just a clonery. You don't have any odor different from cutting grass or something like that. And also, like, I've been doing research on like edible leaves. So if you're only growing leaves, you shouldn't have to put a filter in. And I think you guys kind of missed that. Let's see. Okay. And medicinal marijuana cooperatives. So like, you guys are looking at banning, the code is looking at banning living on properties, which is not allowed for I-502. I understand that, but is required for medicinal marijuana cooperatives. It's required that somebody lives on site. So you're effectively banning medicine for your whole county. And then the last thing is I'm a tier 1 producer and I started this association. We've been working 3 years to get an expansion because we're in poverty. So we just got expanded to 4,000 and your limit to 2,000 is kind of a shot in the face. Thanks. Bye. I think
Okay, Mark.
I think I got unmuted again.
Oh, who was that, Mcrae? Jim?
This is Mark Ambler.
Okay, one moment.
Hello.
Hello, Jim. One moment. Will I share the timer? And then we'll have you state your first name, or your full name, I mean, and you will have 3 minutes to.
Certainly. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes,
go
we
ahead.
can.
Very good. Thank you. My name is Dr. James Mcrae. I am a resident of Snohomish County, a long-term resident of Washington. My history is as a substance abuse researcher. I have a PhD in experimental psychology. I did work on the mechanisms underlying opiate addiction and then some behavioral aspects of human drug addiction in the early days. Then went on to a long career in the pharmaceutical industry, effectively helping a large company sell legal drugs. 7 or 8 years ago, when Washington State went into the cannabis space, I opted to shift my professional interests to a consulting practice, really from the social science perspective, but working a lot with licensees and ancillary businesses in the cannabis space, trying to figure out what was going on and trying to make sure that some of the good that can happen from cannabis being legalized was better realized within the state of Washington. Anyway, with that background, some of the stuff that you're working on up there has come to my attention, primarily because of the restrictiveness of the proposed rules, the breadth and the restrictiveness of them. It caught my interest because this is in many ways the type of rule set and regulation set that I saw counties working on 1 and 2 years into this legalization experiment that we're having. So just a note there, it's kind of odd to see this 7 years after the fact. I looked into some of the materials in your previous meeting, and thank you for being so transparent, sharing all of that. But just looking over the complaints that you have received, and they seem to be fairly numerous, I couldn't help but notice that a disproportionate number of the complaints that appear to have been received relating to this industry, relating to the question of production and processing within unincorporated Wacom County, seem to stem primarily from one facility. So I looked up what that facility was. I knew them by name. I'm not going to name them here. They're known to me from some of their other data elements. I don't particularly view them as a good player in the industry for a lot of reasons, very public safety related reasons. And I think you're experiencing some of the side effects of that. I would plead to you not to throw out the baby with the bathwater and compromise a growing industry within your county that is already bringing in approximately $1 million per year just in tax revenue to this council, and an additional set of money coming in from the state for transfer payments. please, not all the farms and processors are equal. Treat them as what they are. Cottage agricultural industry. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, if anyone else would like to speak at this time, please press the hand icon or dial *9 on your phone. One moment, Nick, while I start the timer. Okay. Please state your phone number.
Hi, my name is Nicholas Seiler. I am the CEO of Subdued Excitement, which currently holds a Tier 2 producer processor license in Ferndale. We've been operating in Ferndale since 2013. And for almost the last 2 years, I have been trying to get a second license situated in Wacom County. It has been an incredible struggle. Generally speaking, I don't think you need to make the process harder for people. The problem, as I see it, as a number of people have mentioned, is enforcement. This is the whole package of regulations here smacks of closing the barn door after the horse has gotten out. You have one bad actor that you can't seem to regulate or enforce, and all of the good actors are being penalized for that. And it is a very frustrating situation. I look at the proposed rules, and there's no logical distinction in many of these. The agriculture and the rural zones are treated as basically equivalent, even though they are not. Indoor and outdoor grows are going to be subjected to administrative use permits or conditional use permits, even though virtually none of the complaints are coming from indoor operations. So why are these being done? The regulations that I see here do not seem to address the stated complaints that were the reason for this review of the marijuana laws. It seems like there has been a lack of enforcement, and the county is kind of grasping at whatever it can get to get some control over one or two bad actors. I just don't think that this is the right venue for this. There are police powers that the county can bring to bear. There are ways that our business, our industry can be regulated, rather than making the whole process of starting the business unbelievably expensive and time consuming, which is what you're doing here. You're not going to keep out the bad actors. They're going to get through the process just the same as they have before. And it's very frustrating for us to have our industry singled out like this. I would urge you to reconsider, and at the very least, take some more time, get some feedback from some of the existing licensees. It is going to hurt them. Thank you very much for your time.
No other hands up.
Okay. Thank you, Tammy. So now is the time for commissioner comments. Any commissioner comments? So, Commissioner McClendon, go ahead.
So I just like the commissioners to know that the questionnaire for the public participation group will be going out next week. And you'll probably get an email because you're on a county list. So I hope you will share that with other people in your social circles. We want to be able to get feedback from a broad selection of people, not just the usual suspects who are already in the know within county government circles. So that's all.
Thank you, Natalie. Appreciate the update. Any other commissioners? Okay, let's move on to approval of minutes for the September 9th meeting.
I'll move to approve them.
I'll second that.
Any comments, any correction? Hearing no comments or corrections. Emmy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Abstain.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Mosseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
Okay, that is 6 yeses, so that carries.
Okay, so the topic or main topic this evening is proposed marijuana code amendments. And we have several staff. We have Charles Sullivan, Amy Keenan, and Cliff Strong will take the lead on that. So go ahead, Cliff.
All right, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. So based on what we heard from you all last time, as well as the folks that have testified, the industry folks, as well as their neighbors who have complained about some of these facilities, staff put the draft regulations together that's found in your packet. But as you realize, we only had a couple of days to do that. So I hope we got it right, what we heard from you, and please correct me if I'm wrong. But we also have a few new suggestions, just because we continued to meet on this and talk about it longer than we had to get your packet out. So I'm going to explain what we put together, and including our new suggestions as a starting point for your discussion. And we'll just go through each piece of it. I would like to point out that you've also received some written comments regarding this issue, which Tammy's forwarded to you and posted to your meeting materials webpage. And again, as your chairs pointed out, Amy Keenan and Charles Sullivan are in the audience, in your audience, and are here as resources. Sound good? All right. I'm going to share my screen here so we can go over some of this stuff. What I'd like to start with is the definitions. We went round and round about this indoor and outdoor, and how do you explain indoor and outdoor when some of these buildings are a little of both. And we finally realized that what really mattered is whether you're using artificial lights for growing the marijuana. And so we put this together. We decided to define the two types of production facilities as type 1, and that being production takes place outdoors, including in an expanse of open or cleared ground, or in structures that have no artificial lighting for aiding in the growth cycle. With one exception, and this is one of the things we heard from the producers, is that they do need one small structure with artificial lights for overwintering their plants. It's not for growing it during that time, it's just to keep them alive so that they can clone them and then get them back out in the fields. And then a type 2 production facility would mean any production facility that uses artificial lighting for aiding in the growth cycle. So rather than continue to talk about indoor and outdoor, because it just, in our meetings, it kept confusing the issue, I'd like to switch to talking about type 1 being no artificial lights with that one small exception, and type 2 being artificial lights. Does that make sense to everybody? We can talk about that.
Seeing a couple nods here, and I concur with them, Cliff.
Okay. All right, then I want to switch to, in your memo, I put a table 2. It's a summary of the proposed marijuana regulations or rules. I just found this easier for me to kind of compare and contrast, because I put both the table for the existing marijuana rules in here, but then translated what we put together in Exhibit A into a table. And so let me go through that. So we have we have 3 main rows: production, processing, and rent and retail. Under production in the rural zone, we're proposing that a type 1, again, no lights, be an ADM, because those are going to be small for the most part. I should also point out this column here, I added the lot coverage thing, though it's not a marijuana regulation. It is a regulation that would have some bearing on how big something can get, especially based on your lot size. The smaller the lot size, the smaller the amount, the fewer the buildings or the square footage of buildings you can have.
Cliff, can you hold on just a minute? Commissioner has a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, when I was reading this, I don't know if you changed it in this or not, but I was confusing type with tier. Is there any additional regulations for the various tier sizes, or is that just addressed by the square footage of canopy? Or is that
Well, we're trying to address it rather than, because the tier issue is an LCB designation, and they're unclear, confused, whatever, about how to measure those, because depending on whether you spread your plants out or push them back in, you get them tight, it's really difficult to know what that canopy is. And we don't have the ability to go out and measure the canopy. That we have to rely on LCB to do that. So we decided to address it, and you'll see the one that went out to you did have limited tiers 1 and 2, but we're now proposing, this is one of the amendments we're proposing tonight, is we eliminate the tier 2 thing, so we don't have to rely on the LCB for figuring out how big some of these things are. We can certainly measure the perimeter of the facility based on either the fence and or structures, and get a good, clear view of that, even from Google Maps.
So you would consider a facility a fenced-in growing area, even if it was outdoors?
It will, per the definition I just went over with you, it would include all the land and structures that are used for the production of marijuana or processing.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so we're proposing in the rural that type 1s, same in the ag, type 1s be administrative permits, because those are going to be small. We even have these other rules over here. This is an existing rule, actually. So if you're under 4.5 acres, your production facility is limited to 2,000 square feet. And we're proposing that if you're over 5.5 acres, your parcel, you're limited to 1 acre in the rural. So that you couldn't get a tier 3 on that. You might be able to get a tier 2 depending on how tightly you put your plants. But a tier 2 would be a conditional use permit. Oh, excuse me, I messed up there. You might be able to get a tier 2. Type 2 would be a CUP. Same in the ag, type 1 ADM, type 2 conditional use permit. In the industrial districts, we're proposing that we don't allow the the facilities that don't use artificial lighting, meaning if you're going to put lighting in, you're going to be in a building, and our industrial districts are more appropriate for structures and creating jobs and industrial jobs and things like that, not for a business that has a couple people out there growing pot. Okay, same thing, type 2 in the LLI and the HI type 2 be a permitted use. So these in the industrial zones, a production of type 2 would be a permitted use.
But if you can hold this for a minute.
Sure.
Or maybe Barry has a question for you. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know if you want me to save all this for work session or just let you do your thing.
No, I appreciate the questions now. So.
Okay, so you go from 4.5 acres if it's less, limited to 2,000. Then as soon as you jump to above that, you go up to an acre, and that's a big jump. That's like 20 times that. So I think it would read better if it was for parcels less than, say, 8 acres. Production facility is limited to 10,000 square feet, because that is the limit for a tier 2 grow.
Okay, so can we set that aside then? I think this would be better for you to make your proposals on changing this after I've explained this to the commission and see how they feel about it. But I think that's a valid point. So I'm not trying to set it. I just want you to set it aside for a minute and come back to that.
Perfect.
And if you'll want again, but Commissioner Hanson, go ahead. Commissioner Hanson, you had your hand up. You still wish to speak? You need to unmute there.
He's muted.
Unmute, okay. All right. I might not be reading this carefully enough, but I don't see a reference to rural industrial and manufacturing zone. Even
That's
though
right here.
Oh, that's what that is? Okay,
Yep.
got it. Okay, because I noticed that in the definition of that zone, it included leather products, which stink like hell, and marijuana odors as things you would expect in that zoning.
And it might be, we're not married to any of these rules. We just tried to, as quickly as possible, get something on paper based on what we thought you heard.
I'll hold off the changes till you're done. Just want to clarify that. Okay.
Yeah, you guys can do this as you wish. We're not, like I said, we're not married to any of them. So in the ag, production facilities would be limited to 2 acres, and again by the lot coverage. And then in both the rural and ag districts, there'd be the separation requirements. There'd be the limit on licenses per lot. And then the rest of these things that we'll go through later. Yeah, those will become more clear as we go through the actual language. So, and then for processing, looking at in the rural and ag, be an ADM, again, administrative approval. Again, that requires public notice and allows people to comment on it to staff, via written comments, but still allows people to comment, and we take those into consideration. And then processing in the industrial districts be a permitted use. In the rural zone, processing would be, it would have to be an accessory use to production in both the rural and the ag. So in order to do production, you can't just go out there and do production. You have to be a producer and have a production license. Okay, so that's what we're putting proposing for where you can do and what with what permits and what size you can be.
Can you hold just a moment, Cliff?
Yep.
Commissioner Mcrae, go ahead.
Sorry, just to, so make sure I'm on the right page here. Type 1 is no lights.
Correct?
Okay, and type 2 is with lights.
Yes. Okay. So the reason we the reason we're proposing that the type 1 in these zones could be an ADM. Again, we heard you guys be somewhat sympathetic to, you know, new folks starting up a business, and you need us to be able to do it outdoors. You need to, you know, without a lot of capital. But in these more residential neighborhoods, they really should be more the small scale facilities, not the larger scale facilities. So these rules here, as well as these, keep things pretty small. And and so we thought that, you know, if you're doing a type 1, again, no lights, small scale, that could be an ADM, whereas the larger facilities with structure, lots more structures and lights and having to have the fans and all that stuff in their structures would be a CUP. Okay, so now I'm going to turn to these and just go through them with you one at a time. So the first part of this is just all the amendments to the different zoning districts. Previously, you know, they laid out what you could do here by what permit, but also had rules in them about how you had to do it, and they just repeated themselves. I've moved those things into the big section on the supplementary requirements down here. So all these things that you see scratched out up here, anything that we thought would still be applicable, we've moved down below. So it looks like a lot of deletion, but it's moving stuff. Okay, so I'm not going to go through each one of these because what I just did that with the table, what it says. But essentially, it tells you what you can do with what permits in what zones. All right, but now I want to get down to the supplemental requirements, and I'm just proposing to get rid of the 2 sections we have. Some of these didn't make any sense, and I've pointed those out in comments to you. The ones that still made sense, we moved down here into, we now have 2 sections, again, have 2 sections, one for production and processing facilities and another for retail sales facilities. We really didn't have any rules for retail sales facilities, although we haven't had any complaints about those. I thought it'd be at least be good saying you have to have your license and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So the marijuana production and processing facilities section, I've broken into 3 sections, some kind of general stuff, some district specific standards, and then facility design standards. Under the general, it's the stuff, you know, you have to have your LCB licenses. You can't do it as a home occupation, or you can't do it in a home where police aren't able to enter because it's your home. Here's one of the big policy issues that we did talk about: non-conforming uses. And so this section applies to those marijuana facilities legally existing as of, and then this will be the date this gets adopted, that due to non-compliance with these standards. So because we're changing the standards, there are some legally permitted things out there and some that may not be permitted. The legally permitted ones would become legal non-conforming uses if they don't meet these standards. So that's why we're having to address this here. And I explained at your last meeting that our non-conforming, our general non-conforming regulations are very liberal and allow you to expand as you wish. It allows you to change to another non-conforming use. And given the types of complaints we've heard, we didn't think that that would be appropriate. So this section applies to those facilities that, due to non-compliance with these standards, become non-conforming. Legally existing facilities that meet these standards are not considered non-conforming and may continue the use, or they may expand with the proper permits. But for non-conforming facilities, for continuation of non-conforming uses, any legally existing marijuana production or processing facility that becomes non-conforming may continue operations as a non-conforming use within the terms of their permits, even though when those facilities do not meet the standards of this section. So that's pretty standard it's very standard based on court rulings and all that kind of stuff. If you were legally permitted and the rules change about you, you can continue to do what you're doing. But when it comes to expansion of non-conforming uses, we say similarly, expansion may be allowed, except that expansion of non-conforming type 2 marijuana production facilities is prohibited. So again, these are the ones that use artificial lights. They're more likely to be in greenhouses or hoop houses or in buildings. And we're saying that expansion of those types should not be allowed if the schema we've laid out works for the commission. Any other expansion shall be limited to 10% in area unless the standards of this section are met. So you may be a non-conforming use, you can continue to do what you're doing, but if you want to expand, you can do so, but you'd have to meet the new standards. So that's a way of bringing older facilities into compliance with the newer rules. And then change to another non-conforming use. We're just saying that that section of the code shall not apply. Non-conforming marijuana production or processing facilities shall not be able to change to another non-conforming use. They shouldn't be able to put a junkyard in, for instance, or anything else that's not allowed in that zone. Do those make sense to the commission? Okay.
I think it's going well. Cliff, go ahead, continue.
Okay. Some of the district specific standards. So facility size in the rural district, processing facilities or production facilities and parcels, and we talked about this in the table, on parcels smaller than 4.5 acres shall not exceed a total of 2,000 square feet. Again, that's an existing rule. We just moved down here, added this one, but if you're larger than that, you should not exceed 1 acre. Again, I know Commissioner Mayberry has, he might want to propose something different, but that's where we are right now. In the ag district, production for processing facilities, again, on parcels smaller than 4.5 acres shall not exceed 2,000 square feet, and on lots greater than that, not to exceed 2 acres. So slightly bigger facilities can go in there. Now, this is another one of the amendments we think we don't need. So limitations on liquor and cannabis board tiers. When we sent this out to you, it contained this. And that was saying in the rural and ag districts, for type 2, only tier 1 or tier 2 licensed production facilities are allowed, and tier 3 are prohibited. But we actually think that these facility size requirements does the same thing, so that we don't really need this. Okay. Separation of uses. So in the rural and ag districts, you can't be within 1,000 feet of a community center or 300 feet of any residential unit not located on the same parcel and existing at the time of application, and then how to measure it. Limit on number of licenses per lot in the rural and ag districts. Yeah, you can only have 1 production license and or 1 processing license. And again, in the rural and ag districts, processing facilities are only allowed as accessory use to a production facility. So same thing I pointed out in the table. Oh, the one thing I didn't point out, we talked about this last time though, everybody seemed to agree, and that's that any processing facility that uses hazardous or flammable solvents or gases are allowed only in our industrial districts, the LII, HII, and the RIM districts. And again, as I pointed out last time, this shouldn't affect anybody, because to be able to use these chemicals, you have to have a fire, fire sprinkler system, fire suppression system, and there's just not the fire flow out in the rural district to get these. Okay. As for production or facility design standards, lighting. So all outdoor fixtures that are illuminating production or processing operations. And so these, we're talking about like the lights, the safety lights, the lights you have for just being able to see, et cetera, not the ones that are designed for helping to grow the plants, shall be designed and down shielded to direct light away from adjoining property, critical areas, shorelines, and public roads. And then all structures using artificial lighting for aiding in the growth cycle of plants shall install and employ mechanisms such as blackout shades that prevent light from escaping production structures. So if you have a greenhouse or a hoop house, even if you're in the type 1 where we're saying you should be able to at least have a small overwintering shed of some sort, you got to use blackout lights or blackout shades or something like that to keep the light from bothering your neighbors. Screening, this just points to our landscaping requirements that require screening. Security, just saying that you got to install the security requirements of the WAC before you get your certificate of occupancy. Parking just says you have to meet 2080 500 or off-street parking and loading requirements. Wastewater and water and waste disposal basically just says you got to put your systems in and meet Title 24 and WAC requirements. Noise. So producers and processors shall comply with 2080 620, which is our standard noise requirements for everything. And fan noise from operations shall be minimized. The licensed engineer has to design and install the noise control system so we're not getting noisy fans and things like that. And it just gives some examples of how that can be done. Odor. So all production and processing, whether you're type 1 or type 2, you can't let odors leave your property in such concentration or such duration as to cause a public nuisance or threaten health and safety. But for type 2 production, again, this is the one that uses lights. They got to minimize odors emitted by using best management practices and technology, and all air has to go through odor control system before being vented outdoors. Mechanical engineer has to design it. It has to be approved by our building official. This is something we just added. That's what all the yellow ones mean. And then there's some examples of what you can do to do that. Okay. And then this is another one we've added, building permits required. Building permits shall be required for any structures used in type 2 production facilities. So the building code itself kind of exempts hoop houses. And we've had some weird policies in the past. But we've talked to our building supervisors person, and they're okay with saying that all the structures in a type 2 facility has to get building permits, whether you're a hoop house or not, because there will be lighting, there will be electricity and fans running out there. So you need to get all the appropriate license or permits for that. And again, the retail sales facilities, like I pointed out, we didn't have any rules. This just says you got to have your licenses. You can't do it in a house, or you can't do it as a home occupation or cottage industry. You got to install your security requirements of the WAC, and you got to meet your off-street parking requirements. Okay. Well, now we're moving on to the definitions, and we're amending a couple. So agriculture and agricultural processing, just to point out that production of marijuana is not considered agriculture, and the processing of marijuana is not considered agricultural processing. The rest of these I haven't monkeyed with, except for a couple of minor edits. This we have already gone over, and adding this clause here too, so that a retail facility shall include any building or portion thereof that's associated with the sale of marijuana. So that's what we've come up with. Amy or Charles, any of you want to add anything to that before we open it up to discussion with the commission?
I don't have anything to add. I think you went over everything that we discussed after we sent the changes in. I think you've addressed everything, but we're here to answer any questions.
Okay. All right, so commission, this is back to you.
Commissioner McClendon, go ahead.
So I have a question following up on some of the comments made by members of the public.
Sure.
One was suggesting that this was simply a lack of enforcement issue on one or two bad actors. And I guess I'd like you to address what enforcement is existing that we're not enforcing, and what rules we're not enforcing, or if you see that we lack the rules.
Well, I think it had more to do with who's supposed to enforce what. So the actual odors, whether it's a public nuisance or not, is supposed to be regulated and determined by our, what's the name of it, Amy? It used to be the Clean Air Agency, Northwest.
Northwest Clean Air Agency? No,
Yeah, is that their, okay. So, and so they have slightly different rules about things. So, it was hard to get them to make a determination and enforce on the odor. The same with like how big your tier was, or, how big your facility was and everything. It was all, that determination was to be made by LCB, the, Liquor and Cannabis Board. And even their staff was unclear as to how they were supposed to treat some of these things. So it was kind of a mess trying to get all three agencies to come to the same conclusion about something. So that's why we wanted to get away from the tier, anything that those agencies are supposed to do, we can't be responsible for them. And we're trying to build into here what we can be responsible for. And that's why we went with area of a facility, because that, like I said, that's something easily determinable, even using Google Maps to do so.
Thank you.
Mr. Hanson.
There we go, unmute. I have concerns also about making regulations that have no enforcement mechanism, also about how one would be able to define what is a level of public nuisance, but I'm not expecting anyone to come up with any real answer to that. I just would suggest that because of that, we need to be particularly stringent in the other regulations to kind of keep a lid on this. One question I have is, if we're going to require a conditional use permit, how difficult is that to get? And doesn't that perhaps make it easier for someone who has a lot of money to hire lawyers and consultants to get a permit than just Joe Schmo?
I'm gonna let Amy and or Charles address this, because they're the ones involved in the permits more than I.
Sure. There isn't a huge difference between the two options, administrative approval and or conditional use. The conditional use is a little more expensive, but I think in terms of even a small grower, if that's the difference in whether or not you can make it in the business, you probably aren't viable to begin with, to be honest with you. It's like, I would guess maybe $2,000 difference total. on the top of my head. The real difference is with the conditional use permit versus an administrative approval. With the conditional use permit, the hearing examiner makes the determination. And so it's just, it kind of gets to the hearing examiner level without an appeal having to be filed. So we have a hearing without the need of an appeal being filed. I think that's, I mean, truthfully, the biggest difference. Amy will tell me if I got that, if there's something I'm missing there, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think Charles got it there. I think that the conditional use permit gives the public the opportunity to testify to the hearing examiner directly, which gives the public a bit more options as far as how to get their concerns known. So I think it's a public participation type of permit. And we can add any conditions to both an administrative use or a conditional use, but it is the hearing examiner who does that with the CUP.
So wouldn't you say then that as long as the applicant meets all the conditions of their expansion or their siting, they should be able to get a conditional use permit?
Yeah, and in fact, that's one of the things that as planners, we have to tell people all the time, that if you meet the criteria, you will get your permit, no matter what it is. And that's not always what people want to hear, but if you meet the criteria, you will get the permit, whether that's an administrative or a conditional use permit.
Thank you so much.
Commissioner Mayberg.
Yeah, I guess just from hearing from the neighbors, it seemed like the biggest issue was the fact that it was outdoors. So it kind of surprises me that we're trying to regulate tougher on the indoors. I would think it would be opposite. I was reading the Chelan regulations, and they all but banned outdoor grows. You basically have to have a minimum of 200 acres to put one plant in the ground, just because of the buffers. But as far as indoor grows go, they basically allow all tiers, but they're very stringent on both lighting as well as odor control. So in a way, I feel like it makes more sense if we focus more on restricting how big and where the outdoor grows can go, and just put more requirements on lighting and odor control for the indoor ones. Just, it's easier to control.
May I add something to that, Mr. Chair?
Certainly, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that the majority of complaints we heard was from an outdoor grow that used, it was kind of a hybrid. They used the hoop houses and greenhouses to start their plants and then move them outdoors to flower. And they had 5 acres. They had a canopy of almost 5 acres. We have not gotten any complaints from the smaller, either indoor or outdoor grows. It's basically just that one. And they've really gone beyond what we think they should be able to, but the LCB has not made that determination on their canopy.
Commissioner Hanson.
Just a clarification for us is that what we learned from the testimony last week is there's really very limited applicability of a true outdoor grow with not enhanced with the lighting. And that's what the issue is the lighting, because then you have multiple crops over the year and you have those odors and have the other nuisances and impacts. So basically there is no outdoor grow. If there was, they wouldn't be able to sell it because it'd be too crappy. So we're just So what we're talking about is hoop houses and greenhouses when we say outdoor grow, and that seems to be the problem.
Staff response to that.
No, I think Jim got it right. It's that confusion between what's indoor and outdoor, and switching to whether they use lighting to extend the growing period or not seems to be what matters.
Commissioner McClendon.
I just wanted to confirm on under the facility design standards, which is on page 6, I mean, it's page 9 of the actual amended code. Under odor, item G. We're just assuming that a type 1 facility, which is no artificial lighting, won't constitute a nuisance, an odor nuisance, because of its limited bloom period. Is that?
That was kind of the testimony we heard last time, is that if you're not using artificial lighting here in Whatcom County, you can only get one crop, using the sunlight. And correct me if I'm wrong, Amy and Charles, but if I recall, we haven't gotten any complaints from the small outdoor grows. It's all been the bigger ones, and it's all been the bigger ones.
I'm not sure we can, I don't know if we can say we've got none. I would have to look back on that. I've never, and I don't know what you mean by small. I know we've had a complaint about a tier 1 facility that is outdoors. So that would, or tier 2 that's outdoors, but that was limited to, that's a 1 complainant, 1 facility issue. So I think in general, I think the idea, yes, that the tier 1s and 2s, we haven't had many issues. I can't say none, but I don't think there's many.
Okay, so we're not defining what's a nuisance. We're just kind of saying you can't be a nuisance, but we're going to allow non-artificial light outdoor grows on the assumption that a short duration bloom period doesn't end up being too bad.
Right. That's how these are built, whether you guys agree with this or not.
Okay.
I don't know. But
yeah. Okay. That's what I need to know.
Yep.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Does the county have any control in stopping an individual from getting more than 1 permit per lot?
I don't think so.
At present,
I mean, we do get the list of licensed, all the licenses at least annually, if not more frequently than that. So we would see whether somebody else has picked up another license or not. And
So
whether they
we see it, but we don't really have a way to enforce that they can't associate it.
Well, the stories I've heard is that, so I think Nick comments on every licensed application, but whether the LCB takes into account our comments or not is unclear.
Okay. I think there's a problem with not focusing on the outdoor grow. You could have 1 parcel that is a large, type 2 grow with lights, and then another parcel that's owned by the same company with an outdoor license, and just continue to feed it with plants. So I don't think we're quite solving it.
Next door to one another, you mean?
Well, it could be
or
50 miles away if you want. It's just,
yeah. I think you got a really good point there.
Anyway, I still think we need to focus on the outdoor.
Charles, would you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to get back to the question with regards to licenses on a property. At present, we don't really have a handle on that with the current code. There's not a way that we sort of regulate that, except for that through the administrative use process or the conditional use process, our ability to, at this point we've been saying you have applied for 3,000 square feet of canopy, or 10,000 square feet of canopy, whatever it is. And then we get into a scenario where we don't know how many licenses it really is to get to that canopy level, and we don't count canopy. So our attempt to tackle that after listening to you all last week was the facility sizing requirements for the outdoor grows. So that was the attempt to deal with that in a way that we could, rather than dealing with licenses or tiers, which we have limited oversight of, because that's LCB stuff. We do have oversight of site plans and areas. And so the 1 acre area, for instance, dovetails with what we do for administrative approval uses in the R zone all over the place. So it's very similar to other commercial uses in the R zone. So it's sort of justifiable that way. So that's the way we did it. But if you want us to do it a different way, clearly we can, but that was our attempt at least.
Commissioner Lund.
Well, just to follow up on the point that Commissioner Mayberry raised, that's an interesting idea that an outdoor grow could be fed with a partner facility that was now classified as indoor, but would they actually be able to flower and could they actually grow year round? Or do we need to put some language saying that an outdoor facility is limited to one? How can we? Yeah, one growth cycle. Yeah.
Yeah, Commissioner Mayberry, would you like to comment?
Yes, sorry. Yes, definitely. I'm looking at the problem child here, and like 99% sure those are pots. So it's probably being fed by a fairly large greenhouse somewhere, especially if they're getting multiple crops, and there's nothing on this property that's got big enough greenhouse to do that. So I don't know if we can regulate that or not, but one crop cycle outdoor would be good.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. I don't know what to do about that.
Commissioner Hanson.
As someone with experience growing marijuana, I would think that marijuana is like grapes, wine grapes. You have to have a certain amount of sun hours at the right periodicity of light to bring out the resins to get the quality to make it commercial. So most likely, if it was growing outside, they'd rush it into the greenhouse to finish it off, because they wouldn't be able to bring the resins up without having the right light and temperature, right controlled conditions. If we can say one cycle per year, I'm all for that. But I really think that putting a limit on the lighted facilities is the key to it. I have a recommendation in that regard, but maybe we need to have more questions and discussion, and I can come back to that.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I don't have any experience with this specific plant, but I do know that with a lot of crops now, you can bring them out, basically artificially do everything that the plant needs to do, whether it's cooling, light hours, and then bring them out exactly when you want them to flower or fruit, and it basically extend outdoor crop life. And based on, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. I think it's Charles was saying with the auto flower, whatever they call them. I'd be surprised if that's not the case with some of these growers.
Commissioner McClendon.
But I would think that, as Commissioner Hanson said, that the flowering period is the most critical, and that if they were going to do that, they would be bringing them into a controlled environment in a greenhouse for the flowering period, rather than bringing them out into questionable environmental conditions during the flowering period. So, I mean, I don't care if they grow tons of, I mean, they could have field after field of plants that they use the cheap sun to bring to maturity and then move them into the greenhouse, where when the odor is the issue, to finish them off. And you know, I don't think that would be any problem for anybody, because then they would be in the controlled environment when the odor is the issue.
Commissioner Mayberry, was your hand up to respond to Commissioner McCrae?
Yeah, I just want to say that's not typically the case for other crops. Typically, they're started in the greenhouse and then brought out. And especially with our summers, the way they are with the long daylight hours, we actually are pretty good conditions for having a long fruiting period, as long as you can get the growing period started early. So that's all.
Commissioner Massari, thanks for being patient. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll defer to the chair here, but we're asking a lot of technical questions, and I see that we do have an attendee that has their hand up that I believe could respond to some of this. I don't know if it's appropriate, but it might help clarify some of these questions.
Well, commissioners, you do have access to the attendees. If you'd like one of them to speak, go ahead and ask for that, and we'll do that. Right, Commissioner Hanson.
Sorry to beat a technical dead horse, but marijuana plants, unless it, you know, maybe it's all changed now. Maybe everything's genetically modified, so it's not natural anymore. But with long days, it grows like heck. When the days go short, it buds. So it needs a 12-hour, like right now, it needs 12 hours a day for optimal budding. That's just an FYI. So, and if there's an expert in the audience that wants to comment, I'd be happy to hear from her or him.
And you have access to lists there. If there's someone that Commissioner Hanson, is there someone that you'd like to speak to it?
No, I don't have anyone in particular.
Sure. Well, let's go on. Commissioner Massari, go ahead. And I am very open to having one of the attendees answer some questions if you have some for them.
Yeah, just to begin with, I'd like to call on Joshua. His hand was up first, and if he could just speak to some of these topics we've been talking about, starting them in indoor, outdoor, finishing them indoor, outdoor, and some of these questions we've been talking about.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey guys, happy to help. You guys are kind of bouncing around the reality of how it works. So the last gentleman speaking was correct. With the exclusion of autoflower varieties, cannabis needs to be in the 12-12 cycle. And so it doesn't initiate here until the 3rd week of August, which means that's the beginning of when the flowering cycle starts. And on a short-term varietal that's 8 weeks, that ends about the 3rd week of October. Right, so we know what happens between now and then. A lot of rain, and the flowers just rot. So I'm really not, it might be better to ask me some questions. I'm not really sure why the council wants to reduce cannabis growing in the community here. It's a really beneficial thing. You get a lot of tax money from it, and it's actually is a cottage industry, and historically has been a cottage industry in this community. We built the glass scene here. There's a lot of history here, and so I won't go off. I'll let you guys ask me some questions.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate that. Okay. Is there another commissioner here? Let's see anybody. I do have a question. I'm not seeing any hands up right now, but there we go. Commissioner Hanson, go ahead.
Well, I've been talking a lot. If you have something to say or question to ask, why don't you go first and catch me later, catch me after.
So this is just one as I was reading it, the question for Cliff. Well, one, you referred to security, and we had some testimony earlier this year, or at least some people come in public comment and talk about security. And you referred to it, and I understand why security is not in this document, but could you explain what the security requirements are?
I don't know all of them. Charles, you do this permitting, you might know them better than I.
Are you guys asking me? I can tell you that for one, you can't get an outdoor grow in this county without getting a building permit, because we're required to have an 8-foot fence, and under building code we need a building permit to do that. So that initiates all of the concerns.
Josh, I appreciate that. I was asking staff to, there's a piece of code that refers to another piece, and I was asking if they could tell us what that piece is, and Cliff deferred to Charles.
Yeah. Can you ask the question again, just so I get this, so I know what I'm answering correctly here?
In a couple places in there, it talks about security.
Yeah.
And cites some, another piece of code, and I appreciate how Wacom County's done it, where they're not repeating the code over and over again. But I'm not sure what security means or what the definition or requirements are.
Yeah. Are you pointing to this right now, Cliff? I
am not. The only place we mention it is, I think, in lighting.
Okay, yeah, there would be for lighting. So there are some different lights, I think, required by LCB, and our attempt there is to make sure that the lights are generally directed away from the neighbors. Factually, I think at certain times of the year, or most of the year, I think that the growers tend to use motion detector lights and such, because you don't want to light poison your plants either. So if you had those lights on all the time, you could potentially light poison if you had outdoor plants. So that's really, I think, a little more with the indoor facilities. And so LCB has some lighting requirements, and we're just trying to make sure that kind of lessen that nuisance or impact to the neighbors by making sure they're not pointing at the neighbors. Is there another place in there?
I think, Charles, what he's asking is, what does LCB require in terms of security? What's the WAC require?
Oh, that's a great question. And I know they require a fence. I know they require cameras, and I do believe that they require some lighting. I don't know what else exactly they require. When this code was written originally, the planner who did that very much looked at LCB code. So I think no change to, it's kind of what we've done with most of the language that deals with LCB security stuff, because really we haven't had issues with regards to what their security stuff does with regards to neighborhoods and neighbors. So I don't exactly know the question. I just know that that's really not where we get any pushback.
Right,
I hope
thank
that
you.
helps.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Hanson.
It's funny that should come up because I took a trip out to Kendall to look at some of these facilities. And I was thinking of going and approaching them to see if I get a closer look. But when I saw the sign, I didn't know whether I'd be bitten by the attack dog or shot first. So I decided I wouldn't. And besides having the big fence with the razor wire and the cameras, they also apparently have armed guards and attack dogs. So I'm not too worried about their security. It doesn't really make a nice atmosphere for people who live in that neighborhood, for their children who want to play, etc. But I kept asking myself, why here? Why here? This is a crappy place to grow pot. It rains when it's budding. It's bad. It's not Mendocino County. It's not Humboldt County. It's not even Wenatchee. And then it finally came upon me as, oh, because we're moderate temperatures. They don't care about using our fine agricultural soils. They can grow hydroponic. What they need is someplace it doesn't get too hot and doesn't get too cold, because moderating the temperatures, especially when they're using those lights, is the big economic challenge. So they're targeting us to grow here in little Wacom County, not because they treasure our agricultural land or heritage, but because we have moderate temperatures. Now, when we learned that an acre of this kind of operation can generate $500,000 a year of revenues, when I think about what corn growing or foliage or organic gardens, what they can generate per acre, it's ridiculous. And John knows that the berry farm that's right now has the highest income per acre, and you guys earn it because you work hard to put out a good product. But I don't think that legitimate farmers should have to compete with these industrial operations for farmland, whether it be prime or subprime, where they might want to do traditional agricultural operations. So, based on that, I think that we should limit type 2 to only RIM. And that's what I'm going to propose, is that we limit it to only rural and REM, rural industrial manufacturing. They don't need dirt. They can grow it on concrete. And why force out the type of farming we'd like to encourage in this county?
Commissioner Mayberry.
And just to respond to Commissioner Hanson real quick, it doesn't look like the outdoor grows, at least the one I'm looking at, is utilizing the soil either. Looks like all weed mat with pots on it. So I think they're kind of in the same boat. I had a question for Cliff, though. Did you get any input from the residents that are being impacted by this on the proposed code?
Not on the proposed code. We got the original letters, and then we've gotten, I think, 2 letters this week. And only one really spoke to the code. That was from an attorney.
Yeah, I was just curious if they felt like this would address.
I don't know. We all expected them all to be here again tonight, so
okay.
We thought we'd hear it then.
Then the other thing is on enforcement. Chelan now requires an annual registration fee for all grows, whether they're indoor or outdoor. That goes into an enforcement fund. I'm just curious if that's something that we could do specific to the cannabis industry, and then with that be build a fine structure if we do see something that is out of whack. Because my concern is it's going to be really hard to regulate people building fences or just putting pots on the ground from a permitting standpoint.
I think it's possible. If you recall, when we did the short-term rentals or vacation rentals, that was part of the proposal to have a annual registration for those who operate the short-term rentals. So I suppose we could do something like that. What we're really doing is building the basis for a business license. Eventually we'll have registrations for all uses, and then you might as well have a business license, right?
I don't know if I go that far. I think that's really important, though, to have this be part of this. If there's no ability for us to levy fines, maybe that's even more important than having a registration fee. Just the ability to levy fines and have a schedule for that.
Commissioner McClendon.
I'm going to change the subject a little bit. I see Mr. Seiler is still here. I wanted to ask him, he said he was having problems finding a site for a second location. And I'd like to know, I mean, that's based on the current code, not what we're considering. And so I'd like to know what kinds of problems he's running into.
Yeah, Tyler, would you go ahead and answer that?
Yes, thank you for giving me the chance to reply. The problem is that there are simply not a lot of properties that fit the criteria. You have the setback issues. There are substantial obstacles in place for anyone who is new coming in to try and get something started. I don't, there was an initial rush when this started off, but most of the licenses are situated at this point. Right? There is not going to be a flood of people coming to Wacom County, and all of the viable properties have been taken. It is very, very difficult. I have been looking for a property for well over 18 months at this point, and finally found one that came on the market that is 307 feet from a residence and that barely fits our criteria. And we don't have access to financing, so it has to be within our price range. There is just a host of issues that make it prohibitive. And it is very painful listening to this conversation because there are so many misconceptions being bandied about. The problem grower in Kendall is not growing flower. They are growing for extraction. They don't care what it comes out. They don't care that there's mold in it. The reason that they chose Kendall was because it was cheap. It has nothing to do with the environment. I'm sorry, I'm just frustrated listening to this because this is being pushed through so fast, and there are so many things you don't understand about our industry, and you are going to hurt a lot of people and a lot of livelihoods. And I'm just begging you, please bring in some expert help here and get some feedback from the industry. It is extremely difficult doing business. You don't need to make it harder for us to do business. You need to identify the problems and find ways to enforce them, and we can help you do that.
For a minute, yeah.
So
I'm sorry, yes.
Can you tell me, I'm a realtor. I'm not a realtor. Let's say I'm a realtor, and you're telling me to go help you find a property. What are you gonna tell me? Describe the kind of property you need so that I can understand what your limitations are.
Well, I could tell you my specific needs, but there is a range here. It's not a one size fits all. But generally speaking, you have to have the right zoning area, you have to have access to a significant amount of electricity. You have to have your setbacks taken care of. You have to look at critical areas. You have to look at everything that you normally look at for a business plan. It's not easy to find a place that fits all these criteria.
But what are those criteria in your understanding?
You're putting me on the spot a little bit. I could write you up something and have it for you tomorrow.
I'd appreciate that, because I'm struggling with understanding why this is so hard. I mean, I understand. I mean, people can't find the houses they want. I mean, real estate in general is tight. So I don't know whether we're talking about just the general problem of Wacom County real estate, or we're talking about something more specific about the criteria that these rules currently in place demand.
In fairness, I think that it is both. The Wacom County real estate market is very tight right now. There's no doubt about it. But again, when the regulations came on place 7, 8 years ago, there were a limited number of locations that really fit the bill, and they were swooped up. And you have 1 or 2 bad actors taking advantage of that right now, but there are not a sea of other options for us out there. There are very few alternatives, and I would be happy to write something down and walk you through our thought process and our requirements as we've been looking for a property. We did in fact buy one in Sumas, and we are hoping to do something out there, but you know, it is taking a long time, and it is going to cost millions of dollars for an operation that is 2,000 square feet and doesn't have any flowering plants. Right. You guys don't make this easy, all right? And in my humble opinion, it doesn't need to be made harder to get into. You just need better enforcement of the existing.
Yeah. When we're talking to you, asking for your expert opinion in the industry, and I understand you're frustrated, but I want to ask you to keep it to answering the question. So, Charles, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I think I can maybe help that question a little bit. Just because people come in and ask about these facilities, and so quite a few of the facilities that are out there that have been cited, someone has actually asked me about, and we look at the GIS together, and it's no different than any other business or home, right? Where can we situate this thing? And so the limiting factors for the I-502 businesses really vary depending upon their type. So if you are, for instance, if you are doing one that we would now call a type 1, or which I believe I have right, essentially one that requires that has no light. The size requirement is a little bigger for the area. So critical areas really comes into play there. Wetlands, not being in a flood zone, right? So you're not going to be able to clear a wetland or a buffer to do that. That's not going to happen that way. And it's not, we make some exceptions for farming and agriculture, but this is not agriculture. So there's no exceptions for ongoing ag or even changing ag types. And then I've seen on those light dependent one or sunlight dependent ones, flood get in the way. I've done a pre-app where the fence was a problem with flood, and so that was not an option for that particular operator. So those are the sort of the natural resource ones sometimes get in the way with the sunlight only style. The indoor grow operations are the ones that require light, require a lot of electricity. So location next to, so they don't have to run. It's very expensive to run electricity. So we've seen that be a scenario that gets in the way. We've seen fire flow be an issue in different places, I believe. And you still can run into the same critical area issues if you're going to build a building. And then there's the issues related to setbacks that everyone has issue with. And then the third type of facility that we've seen is sort of the hybrid model that we don't speak to with these code changes, because those will just become light dependent ones that I think type 2 is how we phrase them. I don't have the paperwork in front of me, but I believe that's type 2. And so those ones sometimes run, they're a larger facility because they want some plants to be grown outdoors without light. And then they also want to grow throughout the year in an indoor light dependent, added light scenario. And so they run both those natural resources and electricity and fire flow. Really, that's why those light dependent ones, maybe, where you have to have that electricity. That's why partially why we've looked to try to site those in the industrial or certainly out of the resource lands for the most part, right? So those are what I see from when people have come in and asked me the question, where can I place this? And I have 3 places in mind, right? And we look at it on the GIS. Those are sort of the limiting factors that I know on the top of my head.
Thank you, Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I got a question for Nick. How would you, what are some ideas that you'd have for us to avoid another situation like we have in Kendall?
Thank you. Go ahead, Nick. There we are.
Well, Commissioner Mayberry, you might not want to hear this one, but I do think that business licensing is a viable alternative here. I think that it is a mistake to try and regulate this through the land use code. This can be done. There can be criteria that are set up that allow business to operate under certain conditions, and you are only allowed to do that so long as you keep those conditions in place. I think that the whole idea is in the wrong venue.
All right, thank you, Nick. Commissioner Hanson.
Well, I certainly have empathy with the lack of funding because of federal regulations inhibiting the banks from loaning to these legitimate businesses, and I think it's really unfair. And I see how that would be a burden trying to use cash in hand to put together this expensive infrastructure and buy property, all without borrowing money from a lending establishment. But on the other hand, that isn't a rationale for us to have lax land use regulations, because we have to protect the general public. And what Charles was saying about made me think again, REMs might be a good place to place these. And also, if you need electricity, it seems like that'd be a place where where electricity would be more readily available rather than trying to site them next to substations in rural areas. And I say yes for the licensing and enough of a fee that we could pay for enforcement personnel.
Commissioner McClendon.
So I have not been out to look at the notorious place in Kendall, but from what I've heard, it sounds like it doesn't comply with under the facility design standards, item B, screening. Is that a current rule that there needs to be landscaping and screening consistent with the various code
No, the only rule is it should be compatible with the general appearance and character of the surrounding area.
Well, and that sounds like it totally is not.
Right, but
So
how
the
does one
question is,
enforce?
how do we, I mean, if this really is an enforcement issue about one person, one facility that's not really playing nice, how would that have been enforced before they built their giant fence? And
This rule about being compatible?
yeah,
Not very well. I mean, it does. What does it mean? You know, what is compatible in whose eyes? It's a rule that's why we're not bringing it forward in the new ones. It's one that's really difficult to make a judgment call on.
so the other issue that struck me is, you know, we have these fairly large setbacks, but which would presumably, if the setback, you put your fence where the setback is supposed to be, then you'd have a huge amount of buffer in a rural area to maintain a rural character from the road and from adjacent properties. I'm puzzled as to why that didn't happen here.
I don't know. Maybe Nick or Amy, maybe you can talk to that.
I can speak a little bit to
Charles. I meant, sorry, not
yeah, that's fine. Nick's a good friend of mine. He's a good guy. So there are, as far as landscaping goes, landscape standards do apply. So that doesn't come out of the marijuana code. That comes out of straight zoning code. That comes out of whatever zone district you're in. Those do apply. And I know of, on the top of my head, three facilities on the Mount Baker Highway, and I do believe all three comply with the landscaping code outlined from my perspective. One is stuck way back, not way back, but you can't see it from the highway. The other two are adjacent to each other and have plantings.
Thank you. Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I think the issue is with the setbacks really only work for a certain size parcel. So the larger the parcel gets, the higher the percentage of crop is being grown per the total parcel size. So again, just looking at this Kendall grow, it does look like it's 300 feet away from all houses, but it's using about 50% of a 10-acre parcel. So I think it would make a lot more sense, just from an odor standpoint at least, to limit that to a percentage of parcel size. Obviously smaller than 50%.
Right, which is what these do, the facility size in the rural and ag districts, limiting it to 1 and 2 acres max.
And just to add on to that too, I think you'd help out a lot with that by limiting the number of licenses that can be applied to one parcel, because if we had that, then this guy's got to have at least 7 licenses if he's legit. And maybe he's not, but.
Right, so that's where this comes in then.
Yeah. The maximum on a tier 3 is 30,000 square feet, and that's less than an acre, about 3/4.
Commissioner Masseri.
Has Wacom County specifically talked to the LCB about this this one facility that seems to be the issue in the county? I feel like we're doing a lot of work trying to make the land use code deal with the enforcement that LCB potentially should be dealing with.
I know our enforcement people have, but I don't know the details of it.
Commissioner Hanson.
Oh,
I just want
can
to.
I answer that?
Yeah, you answer first. I have something else to say. Go ahead.
Okay, I would just add that we have a project out in the county that clearly everyone is aware of, and there's been lots of letters written about that, but we are also in the process of issuing permits and appeals on that. And so there may be problems, it may not be consistent, it may be consistent, but that's really not been determined by the appropriate bodies at this point. So I think it would be, and the Liquor Control Board is aware of the situation, and we're in contact with them as well. So I just caution on that front, because there will be some additional information that comes out about that, I think, as the hearing goes through and as appeals are done. Just again, as a caution.
Go ahead, Commissioner Hanson.
I just want to clarify that I don't have an axe to grind with that facility, nor do I consider enforcement, even though it's an important issue, the only issue. I would like to see us stop the proliferation of these types of enterprises on inappropriate areas. And so I think they should be, other than the type 1, I think they should be strictly limited to one type of zoning with the other light industrial types of uses.
Go ahead, Commissioner Mcrae.
Yeah, well, part of why I asked that was not to specifically to throw that one under the bus, even though that seems to be the one that's getting the attention, because obviously unless the LCB has actually gone through the process to determine that they're not in compliance, they're presumed innocent, I guess, until guilty. But I guess it seems like we started this moratorium because of complaints. Seems like we're talking a lot about our feelings about marijuana industry in general, which I don't think was the original intent of the moratorium. It was to stop some of the odor and light complaints rather than the specifics of the marijuana industry. And so I just am kind of cautious about rewriting our whole code when we can't really do any enforce the people that are still there that are causing issues will still be there. So I'm just not sure if we're solving any of the actual problems.
Commissioner Lund.
I guess I would kind of echo Commissioner Mcrae's sentiment now. I just feel like I'm not fully understanding the issue enough to understand what the unintended consequences of what we're considering are. So I'm just feeling like unprepared to make an informed decision. And I know that there's been a lot of work on this, but I guess I'm just not fully certain about what the best next step is.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Well, we kind of have two problems now, because now we have a moratorium that is a problem for all these guys, but we also want more time to fix the issue. So I'm wondering if a better solution would be to adjust the moratorium. And I don't know, I don't have, I don't know what's the right thing, but maybe to adjust the moratorium to only apply to tier 3 permits to lessen the impact. I'm wondering if Nick could comment on that.
Nick, would you like to comment on that?
Again, thank you for allowing me to participate. I'm not fully knowledgeable about the complaints that led to the moratorium. I'm aware of the one kind of problem child site. I don't know. I agree with the sentiment that there is more to this than is being rushed through here, and it deserves greater consideration. I'm not sure I am in a position to judge that particular step.
Thank you, Nick. Seeing no hands up, I did want to point out that we've actually had gotten a letter about one facility in Pleasant Valley area that came this last spring, and then I think it was the last meeting or the meeting before, staff confirmed that they were getting complaints about another facility also in the Pleasant Valley area. So I just want to make sure we don't get hung up that perhaps this is being done just to rein in one facility. Commissioner Mayberry.
Yes, just a question, I think for Charles again. I was wondering how many tier 3 facilities we have in Wacom County.
I gave you a map last time. I'll open that up here. Hang on. Planning Commission. It was this one. No, wait, where's that map? I gotta find where I put it. Yeah, oh, there it is. So this shows you where they all are, what type they are, and which one or how many are in each of the zones here. I can zoom in on that if necessary.
That would be great if you could do that.
Maybe. Where's the zoom? Oh, there it is. 100. Can you see that, or should I go bigger?
Well, that's looking great to me, but I don't know how, if everybody else can see it.
Now I can't read the legend.
Well, you all should have copies from the last memo from your last meeting. I don't know if you have them before you or not, but.
So, Cliff, could you do something perhaps? Would you identify which colors on the screen are tier 1, 2, and 3?
These aren't broken down by tiers, the colors. They're just whether it's retail, processor only, producer only. And I don't know how to get rid of this damn thing.
I think the graph on the right-hand side, Cliff, has the number of tier 3s, and I counted it.
There it is.
Yep.
So 0 tier 1s, 1 tier 2, 1 tier 3. That doesn't seem right. Oh, then there's these producers slash processors. So 7 producer process, 7 tier 1, 11 tier 2, that'd be 12 total. 11 tier 3, that'd be 12 total. And just processors 4.
So what's our grand total there, Cliff? Can you give us that?
Yeah, I reiterated that in the memo. Where was it? Was it in this one? Nope, last memo. Let me find it. I know I have it. Planning Commission, that one.
29.
Right here. So 2, 4, 6, 35. Oh yeah, 29.
Thank you.
And 12 retailers. So 29, 35 total.
Commissioner McClendon.
So I hear people's concern about not feeling totally well educated on all these issues and concerned about unintended consequences. My goal is good public policy that serves, that meets the goals that we set out for, and not to have unintended consequences. But I read this, and I really appreciate the summary chart. I think that really helps kind of lay out the choices. And I guess I'm still not clear what the problems are. I mean, a lot of what's in the proposed code is not new code, it's just rearranged code. Or it's not specific to marijuana growing. It's, just your general land use code that everybody has to comply with. So I'm still, maybe, yeah, I'm still not clear what the big problem is. And I guess with what's being proposed tonight by staff. And I guess what I'm looking for specifically is point to a section and say, this is not, this language is going to do X, Y, and Z, which is not what we intend. So if anybody can respond to that, I would appreciate it.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, can Josh answer what the big ones
Yeah.
are?
Well, one,
Josh, we just hold a moment. I just wanted, we had some commissioners saying that there was an issue, and Commissioner McClendon said that she wanted someone to point it out. And I took it that her question was geared toward commissioners. And then Commissioner Mayberry, I believe, asked Josh to speak to that. So Josh, I'd like you to kind of keep it in that narrow scope of what commissioners might have a problem with. So go ahead, thank you.
Sure, and thanks for calling on me. I'd love to be as much help as I can. I think that we're not considering the development of the industry. And as a cottage industry, we hope to have within the year direct farm sales, and that could look it could look very, very different, for a lot of places. A lot of us, none of it, for one, we don't make $500,000 a month. Some of us do, but I definitely don't. Those numbers are pretty inaccurate. I would like a better assessment of those. They're just to throw some numbers out there. That's really the big thing is you're closing down a lot of stuff, and you're honing Wacom County into forcing growers to grow environmentally irresponsibly. When you could simply put rules around light pollution and smell abatement, and you could, and I think that if you're going to do that you really need to have some parameters there. I've been caught up in a 4-year lawsuit based upon a thing that has no parameters, and so I just agree with some of the former sentiments that there should be some enforcement and some way to like calculate, like, hey, this is stinky by this metric, or this is this much light pollution, type thing, because otherwise you put us in a position of just continued litigation, which is unnecessary.
Thank you, Josh.
So are you saying that you want a definition of nuisance odor? Is that the problem with this proposal?
That's not the only problem. That's not the only problem. That's a problem. So for instance, if you had a neighbor that said, this thing stinks, Well, it's just for them to say, and they could not like the
Okay.
person for whatever reason, right? You have to have some way to measure this.
Okay, so what else?
It basically limits anyone new coming in and wanting to do any business. It
How
limits
does it
me
do
to,
that?
because we would have to do CUPs and ADMs where no other businesses have to do that. It's an unnecessary burden. I went through that process. It was a 6-month process, and I ended up having to spend my $30,000 nest egg on lawyers and working through this whole process. Whereas and I have experience growing tomatoes, where when I grew tomatoes, I didn't have to do any of those things. I just was able to get the whole thing going.
So your concern is with the permitting, specifically with the permitting system.
It's really
proposed
challenging.
Require administrative permits and CUP. Okay. Anything else?
I haven't read the whole thing through. I'd be happy to write something up, if that would be of interest, and go through some of those items.
The reason for my question is I don't know what to do with your comments unless you can point to what's wrong with this proposal.
It's not solving. One thing that's wrong with it is it's not solving anything. The problem, the concerns were over a few licenses, mainly one, and these proposed rules won't change anything, and they never will because they're grandfathered in. So, and like Nick said, there is very limited number of licenses. Like, they're dropping like flies. They literally are. And as we move into national legalization, they're going to drop more. And we're going to wish in Wacom County that we had this craft industry here, because we're a big tax support, huge tax support. And I would
again, these are general sentiment comments that, I mean, I'm not trying to criticize you, but from my point of view, as somebody that needs to make a decision about the code, I can't do anything with that. I don't know what to do with that. So yes, if you could.
So you don't have to do anything then.
Well, that's true. We could say, forget the whole thing, repeal the moratorium and just go about our business. But I'm not sure that's
maybe you should come up with
at.
a new concept that puts a little enforcement on some things around the problem issues, like smell and light pollution. That would be like a reasonable thing that we could all help you build that. Nick and I and others would help you guys figure that out in honesty and tell you transparently how it works here, because you guys are kind of all lost in the dark when you talk about it, with respect,
Oh, I get that. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
As Chair, I'm going to interject for a moment and talk to the panel of attendees. This Planning Commission has developed a pretty good history of working both with industry and with people that have concerns that some industries they're concerns that an industry might not be doing the right thing. And what I appreciated Commissioner McClendon's questions, because we have a history of getting that information, but we depend on you to give us that information. And we don't want you to give us your opinion. We want to know the facts of how things work. And I think our Cherry Point was a really good example where we worked with both environmentalists and with industry, and we all came to what seemed to be a workable solution. That's what we're looking for from you. And I appreciate Commissioner McClendon's question. I think that was a great one. We have more commissioner questions. Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask Nick if he has any specific things within the new code that is unworkable.
Go ahead, Nick.
Unworkable is a fairly absolute term. The world will keep turning if you guys pass this. It just, there are a lot more regulations here than seem to be at the root of the problems. It seems like the reason why there were so many odor complaints around this one location was because he was growing about 7 times as much as he was supposed to be growing. So, there are ways that you guys can monitor that and then enforce it other than doing it through these broad zoning code regulations. As Josh said, this guy's going to be grandfathered in, and whatever the official outcome is, he has been the source of all these complaints. There have been problems here. He's the reason we're here. It would be foolish not to acknowledge that. So what is he doing wrong? He's growing too much. There's too much odor, right? So how do we address that? There are some things in these proposals that do get to that. If you limited it to a certain percentage of the size of a parcel, for example, so you're getting smaller concentrations of the odor. There are workable things in here, but slapping on a conditional use permit to an indoor that has no odor issues at all because it's already required to have odor control doesn't make sense. This is too broad. It is a broad restructuring when there are smaller problems that can be addressed.
Thank you. So, Commissioner Major, go ahead.
I'd just like to ask Charles now, what specifically in the code is going to be the toughest to comply with for the, say, a new operation or existing to expand?
Well, expansions for those non-conforming ones, the ones that were made non-conforming, that's gonna, we're limiting their expansions. So to answer your question really directly, that's gonna be the hardest thing for them, right? Because it's a 10% or almost a hard no. I don't think, I actually don't think that a conditional use permit or an administrative use permit is all that cumbersome. It does give the, so I understand what Nick was saying from the industry side. Factually, though, a lot of them have gotten through it. The only place that's really changing is in the ag zone. Not a lot of changes in our zone. I really don't know where this would stop new people from coming in more. But having said that, I'm a planner and not on the private industry side, and so I think their voice is important because I help them out, when they come in. But I still don't know all the facets, especially the dollars and cents. I don't write the checks, right? I just tell them the regs, and I'm cognizant of that. But I don't. The changes in this code are really not great. Really, most of the changes stem around how we're defining it, and essentially not having. Not allowing for the hybrid model as an outdoor grow. That was our attempt, was to, if you're going to use structures to extend the growing season with lights, so you're going to extend that time period when odors can occur, the flowering period, then we wanted to capture those and put them in and have odor control devices in play, have the light deprivation in play. And so that's what our thought was. If that's what is too onerous, then we just need to hear that from the grower side too. I don't know if that's what they're getting at, but that's the really big change. And there are some other smaller changes. Most of the facilities go through some sort of use permit though. So I don't know otherwise. The limiting factor to locations is generally, natural resource stuff or floodplain or electricity or fire flow, the same things that limit development in the county, no matter where you go or what industry you are. So I don't know if I answered that question really at all, because I think the best answer is I don't exactly know.
Charles, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Well, if you were doing multi-family housing, at what point would it require a conditional use permit?
That depends upon the zone. I think, and so we have like 20 something different zone types, and the ones that we can even do multi-family housing in are that we don't have a lot of them. It's usually those URMX, I think, and I want to say it starts at 4. You're really calling out the planner here to know all the codes at one time.
You don't need to give all of them.
Amy, I defer to Amy on that. She's much smarter than me.
Okay.
That is not true. And the multifamily homes, we don't allow much of that because we are mostly a rural county. But I would say in comparison, administrative use permits that we do are very small scale cottage industries with 2 employees. It's an accessory dwelling unit. It's an administrative use permit. When we look at conditional use permits, just for scale of that's more of our schools and our churches. It's our cottage industries, so home-based business with 4 employees. So that's kind of a scale as far as uses and where we allow them.
And then maybe one of the things I was interested in is for housing units. At how many units is it before a conditional use permit is needed? And I realize there are zones, but let's start on the low end there and let us know.
So residences are in general allowed in all zones except for industrial. And so, in our commercial areas, we like the resort commercial, I think after 8 multifamily units, you have to have a conditional use permit. But unfortunately, the comparison is really not useful comparing an urban zone, a resort commercial Birch Bay area versus a rural zone, a 1 unit per 5 acre. It's really a hard comparison to make.
Thank you. Commissioners, what would you like to do here? Commissioner Mayberry.
I guess originally when I was looking over the code that Cliff provided and then comparing it with the Chelan County, I didn't think it was near stringent enough. I think there's a lot of holes that we could still end up having problems with. That said, I think we do need to be careful how stringent that we make this for the existing growers. But since we haven't had any specific pointing out of why this code is going to cause major problems for existing as well as new growers, I think this is a good starting point. I like the percentage of the lot idea. I think that's really important. So I'm good to move forward with this. I don't think it is as onerous on the existing growers as maybe they think it is. If for nothing else, just to lift the existing moratorium. So I'll move that we accept the changes to the code as is.
Again, you're not approving this tonight because you still have to hold your public hearing. So my process question for you is, does the commission feel that they're ready for your public hearing at your next meeting, which is in 3 weeks? Or is there more work that you believe needs to be done on this before you get to that point?
And I'll speak here for a moment. Commissioner Mayberry, I appreciated your motion. I think that probably overrule it, though we don't have a second because the question Cliff brought up is needs to be addressed. Now, if you'd like to restate Commissioner McClendon, please.
I think I'm ready for a public hearing. And I think I would suggest that since we have 3 weeks, that we individually schedule some time to really go through this. So when we have the public hearing, we really know what we're proposing.
Commissioner Mayberry.
I guess the only thing that I feel is not included in this is some sort of fine schedule for violations. So I'd like it if staff could make a proposal for specific violations that they think could occur before our next meeting. You got 3 weeks, Cliff.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Mayberry, being one of the staff that'll probably be in that meeting, is there any way we can narrow that focus a little bit? I understand what you're getting at, and I appreciate that. Violations that may occur, gosh darn it, that's a lot. You know, is there a way is there any, can we narrow that at all?
Well, and may I add before you go, Mr. Commissioner, is we seem to have a problem with just enforcement in general, given that there are 3 agencies that all have their finger in the pie for making determinations. And I'm not sure about how having a fine would make that process even clearer. So, yeah, so now if you could kind of work through that.
Well, just for starters, I guess going beyond the permitted canopy area, that could be one. Also, if they don't have the correct odor mitigation controls in place, they don't have the correct light mitigation controls in place, and those I think are the big 3.
Yeah, I agree with you. Those are probably them, and I'd just like to speak to the ideas a little bit there. The odor, the issue we've had with odor, I think one of the growers tonight kind of got at in that. That's generally, we have an agency in the area that oversees odor for the most part, Northwest Clean Air. And we've tried our best to cooperate with them and them with us. They have their own challenges with regards to odor, especially on 5 acre or greater lots. They also, they have their own challenges. So if we're going to take that on and we're going to find people for that, we're taking on another agency's role. That's now, if that's what you want, you're going to ask us to do. That's, that's fine. I just want to let you know that's sort of where it's been.
Though I suspect our director would oppose it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I wouldn't see it as it smells out here, so we're going to try and levy a fine. And how do you?
Yeah.
I'd see it more as they built the structure, are growing cannabis, and they did not put they didn't put the filters in.
Okay. Yeah, that would be easy enough. I understand that. Yeah, some sort of a violation of their permit one way, because we'd require that through the administrative approval, conditional use permit, and building permit, whichever one's applied. So that, I think that might be possible. I did want to speak to the canopy one though, because I think that's very important, and that's why we went to the size areas with which they can grow in. That again is so there is an LCB component there. That's LCBs to do. Having said that, we may find that they're doing a better job with that at some point, and there might be an opportunity for cooperation there. We have not, I don't believe we've been informed of any overgrows. I've never seen, let me put it this way, I've never seen an overgrow violation in my hand. Like I've never physically seen one, right? So, but that might be something that they get better at. Staff can't, maybe can't's a strong word, but it's very difficult for staff to say, we find that you've grown too much marijuana for our permit when LCB has the same canopy requirement and they didn't find that and they're the experts. So that becomes a really problematic. And that's why we added, that was the idea behind the acreage requirements, right? So that was an attempt, and I reached out to a grower, looked at some other operations to kind of try to figure out the ones that we don't have problems with that are outdoors. How much square footage does it really take per canopy, right? Because you have row sizes. I talked to a grower who's very forthcoming about that. So that's why how we arrived at those numbers. And it would staff, it's a lot easier for staff to look at site plans and total area that you can grow in than it is for us to try to figure out canopy and make a determination on canopy that could not be the same determination that the actual experts with regard to canopy are making. And so that's how we got there. And then the last one, light. I think this code deals with light. If you want some fine structure, we can talk to our director about that. I think this, we can do that. Sure.
And Mr. Mayberry, may I ask, are you looking at fines as big enough that it would get somebody's attention? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and just real quick for Charles, I misspoke. I shouldn't have said canopy, but if we've permitted an acre and then we notice that all of a sudden it jumped to 2,
yeah,
that would be,
So I concur with that 100%. And I think that's, so the fence is always required around the, anytime that they're using sunlight, and they're not within a building. So that site plan stuff, we could maybe do fines with regards to that if we can figure that out. But the fence is what hems them in there. So if they change the fence, that's not very hard to, that's not the hardest thing. And that, I don't think we've really ever had that happen, where the fence size changed. Historically, with regards to fences, you asked for a fence this big, and we were looking at canopies. And so then when the canopy doesn't match the fence, the canopy doesn't match the fence. And so that's why we've tried to get to there. So I think we're in agreement there on how to sort of fix that problem, is sort of just to limit the size that they can go in. So yeah, I think we're on the same page there.
Well, and one other aspect about this that dawned on me while you guys were talking was that if we include in here standards for things we can actually measure, like area as opposed to canopy, and somebody is violating that, then we have a strong case for revoking permits then. And that may actually be enough to do the enforcement. But if other agencies are responsible for making determinations and they never get around to doing that, then we can't say they're in violation of their permit. But with things we can measure, like whether they have odor control or whether they have exceeded their 1 or 2 acres that we can measure from the air, because we don't have the right to go on properties to do this stuff, but using Google Maps or whatever, then the code does have the ability for us to revoke permits.
Yeah, so Cliff, let me jump in here for a minute, because I think we're talking about the minutia, and what we really don't have right now is a fine framework in this section of code and for this industry. And I believe that's really what Commissioner Mayberry is looking at, is let's get a framework set up so that enforcement has some teeth to it. And I do want to just be a little more lighthearted. The state patrol overlaps the sheriff's department. And if I'm speeding down I-5 on my way to planning commission, either one of them can give me a ticket.
That's
Whether it's-
because they have interlocal agreements between them that allows that.
Commissioner Mayberry, were you finished?
I just wanted to answer Cliff asked a question about how the fines or whatever. I think we just need a starting point. It's not going to be perfect. Typically in ag, when we do something that we're not supposed to, it's a recurring daily or weekly fine that happens until it's been corrected.
Like $1,000 a day type thing, or a $5 a day thing, or?
I think that's probably, you and Charles should probably figure out what's appropriate, but and I don't know if there's a level of egregiousness that happens. EPA comes up with all sorts of different numbers depending on how serious they want to be with someone. I think there was one fairly recently that was $250,000 a day or something like that.
All right, that's what I'll put in there.
There you go. And of course, if you fix it within a month, then it all goes away. But something along those lines, maybe not $250,000, but
big enough to make a difference. I get your point. That's why I was just checking.
yeah.
Commissioner Hanson.
Well, I tend to be in support of a fine structure, but I think that it's useless unless there's funding for a staff position to monitor and to process fines, et cetera, because the county employees are already overworked doing their current tasks, and we can't just add that on ephemerally to the existing staff structure. So I think there'd have to either be a business license that paid the money that's going to be needed to hire staff to do that, whether it be a half full-time or what, you all can figure that out, or some dedication of the tax revenues coming in from the marijuana industries. But I do believe that a fine is useless unless we accommodate for enforcement of that fine. Then my second point is that I guess I'm a minority around here, and maybe I'll shut up, but that's not characteristic of me. And before I took this to public hearing, I would prefer that we limit type 2 operations only to the rural industrial zones. That would take care of all these problems that you all are trying to figure out. I personally did not resonate to the complaining public very much, but they did point out some important contradictions that I think we have an opportunity to address. And I think if we put these operations where they should be, a lot of the problems will just go away.
Commissioner McClendon.
Well, first I'm wondering if Mr. Hanson wants to make a motion so we can consider that, but let me talk about my comments about enforcement and fines. Don't we already have a general fine fee structure for fines?
We do.
Okay, so we're talking about something special for marijuana because it's such a lucrative business or something, I don't know. But I'm also aware of the fundamental difficulty in enforcing land use code. Basically, if somebody doesn't want to comply, you just keep adding fines, and then it never goes away. I mean, they're not going to get thrown in jail for violating land use code. So I'm wondering if the idea that had been brought up by a number of different people of a business license would make more sense, because if they have to have a business license to operate, period, in the county, and they fail to comply with the code, which includes all sorts of different regulations on not just complying with state law around their cannabis license, but also the land use code, that would get their attention, I think, more than just, fines on the land use code specifically. I always go back to, well, I have a friend who had a neighbor who decided that, I'm not sure whether he just liked old tires or he was actually making money by allowing people to dump their old tires on his property, but the county could not enforce the existing laws to get that hot giant and growing pile of old car tires from even falling over onto my friend's property. So after 10 years or maybe more, he just finally sold out and moved because the county could not enforce existing land use codes. The same is the case with Ferndale with the weird building on Main Street. That guy just refuses to pay, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's all based on people's reasonableness and willingness to meet community expectations. So I think I'm more inclined for a business license.
Commissioner Mayberry.
So I don't completely understand, because every time we have to do any kind of project, we need permits, and we're not allowed to have our occupancy ability. It's all sorts of things. And we have to check every box. And if we don't do that, my impression is we start getting fined, something bad happens. So Cliff, is it true that there's no enforcement on any county regulations as far as, that'd be news to me.
No, there is enforcement. This one just happens to be fairly tricky because of the different agencies that are involved, and they each have a piece of what they have to make a determination on.
I guess I just see that we could have our own separate thing based on the requirements that we're putting in the building code. That we could use that as a separate way to get at it.
I agree that what we've put before you today is more enforceable on our part than the existing regulations. Especially if we require an administrative use permit or a CUP on something, because those permits can be revoked.
Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, two things. One, I question why we would just specifically target marijuana production and processing for business license and no other industry other than they seem to be the topic of the day right now. The other thing is, Commissioner Mayberry, I question who is levying some of those fines against you. I don't know that that's generally coming just from county land use. I think farming, you're probably dealing with ecology a lot. And I think that what we're seeing is that the agencies that are overseeing marijuana, the state agencies, don't seem to deal with enforcement nearly as heavily as some other industries, enforcement agencies such as ecology.
Commissioner Mayberry, do you want to respond to that?
We've never had a fine or anything, so we just follow the rules.
It's the easiest way, isn't it?
But I know there are a lot of rules.
I apologize if I may have said it, that you wouldn't follow every rule.
All right, I'm glad I gave you the opportunity, Commissioner Mayberry. Commissioner Lund, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm wondering if Cliff could just walk me through. So if an administrative or CUP can be revoked, is that effectively a cease and desist for the operations of that business, or can they continue operating until some point where they want to do an expansion? What does that mean practically?
Well, I'm not an attorney or a code enforcement guy, but I would think so. If you don't have a valid permit, because it's been revoked, then yeah, you shouldn't be doing anything there. It usually gets people's attention if you revoke their permits. We don't do it too often. I know other jurisdictions use that more often than we do.
Commissioners, what would you like to do here? Are we ready to have staff come back with some of these changes? Do we need more we need to add to it or take away? Commissioner Lund.
I'm wondering if Commissioner Hanson wanted to bring forth a motion about the rural industrial.
If I'm in order, I would make that motion that we change these rules, these proposed rules, to allow type 2 operations only in the RIM zone, which is what, rural industrial and something.
The RIM or all three of the industrial zones, LII, HII, and
Well, I thought putting in RIM would be good because there was concern that our industrial land is scarce and that we might have more heavy industry and manufacturing that we'd want to use some of these other areas for. So that's why I was thinking only the RIM.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a
I'll second it for discussion.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I'm not going to support it just because I think that would be the biggest hit to our current and future growers. That'll be a big change, and also increase the cost of purchasing land for a type 2. So I'll oppose it.
Commissioner McClendon.
I don't have a problem with having it not in the ag zone, but I mean, a lot of land in the county is in the rural zone that is not necessarily suitable for growing row crop crops, but could support a greenhouse or some kind of grow in the ground kind of operation. I mean, I think I would go ahead and leave it in the other industrial zones as well. I mean, they would either be priced out if, I mean, a heavy industrial zone, that's assuming we've got heavy industry who wants to build something, that would be fairly high competition for that limited land. So I just guess I would be willing to protect the ag lands by keeping these kind of operations off of those good soils.
Commissioner Hanson.
If Commissioner McClendon wanted to make that as a motion, I would withdraw my motion if that was amenable to the second.
Commissioner Lund, are you amenable to?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner McClendon, go ahead.
Sure. So I would move to remove type 2 from the as a facility permit type from the ag zone.
And I'd second that.
Do we have discussion? Seeing no discussion, Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
No.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Masseri,
No.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
Okay, that is 5 yeses, that carries.
And Commissioner Masseria, was it, I think your hand came up right as we were getting ready to vote. I believe it. I apologize if I missed that.
Yeah, sorry, I got it up late. It was a comment on that, but since we voted, we can move on.
Change it.
I see people are looking over things, but Commissioner Mayberry.
So there's a clarification. Is staff going to propose a fine schedule?
We will talk it over with Mr. Personius, and if he's agreeable, then we will, yes.
I think it's important to have a fine schedule on the table as opposed to just a permit revocation. Is that a word? Just because that's a big step. It'd be nice to have intermediate with the ability to work with the operators.
Well,
approach.
And typically, if we're going to revoke a permit, we forewarn them and say, get your act together, or we'll move in that direction. And that's a fairly big hammer, and people tend to pay attention to that. But I understand.
Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, I was curious if there's any way to find out how, in any instances that the LCB has either put fines on operation or has taken any kind of enforcement action on any existing operations throughout the state, and what those have looked like.
I can answer a little bit of that. I mean, I've looked into that for certain facilities, and my understanding, or what I've done, is ask for public disclosure request stuff. That's, I think, the way they do it. I think that's the only way. I mean, I've talked directly to LCB agents, and I think you got to go through public disclosure, maybe facility by facility. However, if you want that question answered, I'm happy to talk to the people that I talk to at LCB to see if there's another way we could get maybe data rather than facility specific information.
Yeah, and I think that's better than specific facilities. My thought was, if we're looking at fines, if we're looking at enforcement, and there's an agency that supposedly is responsible for this, I'd like to see what they have or haven't done during the course of the 7 years or however long things have been active.
Yeah, again, putting a point on it, Wacom County only, statewide, west side, east side. If I'm gonna ask for this, how do you want it? What do you want me to ask for?
I guess I don't know how big it is. I mean, if we're talking just a few, then I guess just depending how much this is. I don't know if we're gonna get 1 or 2 pieces of data, or if we're talking thousands.
Yeah, and I don't know either. Okay. Yeah,
possibly just Whatcom County, but maybe the state.
Yeah, I'll try to see what I can. I'll see what I can dig up. I mean, I've been talking to LCB agents more than I wish I had to these days. So I'd be happy to do that for you.
Thanks.
Cliff, while everybody's quiet, you mentioned that threats of revoking permits. I think for some of the things that Commissioner Mayberry's been talking about, has Wacom County ever revoked a permit because someone's light escaped their property in a manner that's inappropriate?
I had a hard time understanding your full question there, Mr. Chair.
I'm just thinking about Commissioner Mayberry, his comment about a fine schedule. And I think that what he's thinking of is that there's some acts that need brought into compliance, but that revoking a permit for compliance is probably far more than a court would allow. Say for something like your lighting isn't right and it's bleeding onto a neighboring property. And,
so some details about how revocation may work, or the efficacy of revocation versus fines.
Yeah, I guess could you imagine Wacom County revoking somebody's permit because their lights aren't right, and what kind of process would that be?
It's an administrative process, actually. Now they may take us to court afterwards, but it's something we do here in the department. Now, we don't do it that frequently, and I don't think it's ever been done since I've been here in 7 or 8 years. Amy, do you know of any we've revoked? Or at least gone through that process of threatening revocation?
I know we've revoked a building permit that was issued in error. I don't know of any others that we've gone through actual revocation on.
Because most of them bring themselves into compliance if we start talking now, right?
Yeah, yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I think it's important, specifically with this industry, that we have another option. Just because if we have a change of staff and they're not particularly liking of this industry, a very minor violation could end up in a pretty big penalty. So, be my preference.
Commissioners, anything else? We're at almost 9:20. Are you ready? Are you ready to adjourn? I am only seeing. I see. Cliff, did you want to speak, or are you ready to adjourn?
Well, I can be ready to adjourn. I just wanted to be clear on what our tasks were. So I believe I heard that you guys are ready for a public hearing at your next meeting in 3 weeks. We are to look into possibly a fine structure for violations, especially around excess area light and odor violations. There was a motion to remove type 2 from the ag zone. So not allow type 2 in the ag zone. Maybe I couldn't. Mr. Mayberry raised an issue about somebody transferring plants from one site to another. So we need to think about that a little bit more. And then Mr. Mayberry raised the question of, can we have an annual registration with fees for that as well? Now, is that something, are those the things that all the commission supports us doing? Because I don't take my direction from any one of you, but I will take my direction from the group of you.
I think that, go ahead and land that, Cliff. I am not seeing any objections, and I'm not seeing any thumbs up either, but I am seeing smiles.
Okay.
Thank you, Cliff.
You're welcome.
And we're only doing that because it's got 3 weeks. So, all right.
I'm good then.
Is everyone ready to adjourn? All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
See ya.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye. Good job tonight, Kelvin.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. You always do a great job.
Well, thank you. I have good
Appreciate
support, guys. Gals.